Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast, fog-covered forest. Most people enter this forest with a single flashlight, pointing it straight ahead, hoping they don't trip over a root. This is how the modern world teaches us to live. We become specialists. We learn one trade, one flashlight of knowledge, be it accounting, marketing, or coding, and we hope that single beam is enough to guide us through the complexity of life. But Charlie Munger, the legendary partner of Warren Buffett and the billionaire philosopher behind Berkshire Hathaway, didn't use a flashlight. He built a lighthouse. The Munger Method isn't a secret formula for picking stocks, though it made him one of the wealthiest men on earth. It is a fundamental shift in how to process reality. Most of us are trapped in a salary mindset, a linear, one-to-one relationship between effort and reward. We think if we work harder at our one specific task, we will eventually win. Munger argues that this is a recipe for mediocrity. To truly succeed, you must move from thinking in salaries to thinking in systems. In this journey, we are going to explore why Munger believed that worldly wisdom is a multidisciplinary sport. We aren't just looking for information. We are looking for the structure of information. Why do brilliant people make catastrophic errors? Why do some businesses grow into empires while others wither? The answer rarely lies in the spreadsheets. It lies in the invisible forces of psychology, biology, and physics that govern every human interaction. Over the next 2 hours, we will deconstruct 5 core themes that defined Munger's life. The Latticework. Why you need a toolbox of mental models from every major field of study. Inversion. The radical power of studying failure to achieve success. Psychological blind spots. Identifying the 25 glitches in the human brain that lead to disaster. The Lollapalooza Effect. How multiple small forces create massive, non-linear outcomes. Intellectual integrity. The ethical and philosophical commitment to being a learning machine. This is more than a book summary. It is an invitation to rebuild your brain. It's a transition from being a passenger in your own life to being the architect of your own rationality. Let's begin the walk through the lighthouse. Chapter 1. The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. Why does a man with an IQ of 150 make a decision that ruins his life, his company, or his reputation? If intelligence were a shield, the history of business and politics wouldn't be littered with the wreckage of brilliant failures. Charlie Munger realized early on that high intelligence is not the same thing as rationality. In fact, being smart can actually make you more dangerous to yourself because you become better at rationalizing your own bad ideas. Munger's exploration into the psychology of human misjudgment is perhaps his most significant contribution to the world of systems thinking. He viewed the human brain not as a perfect calculator, but as a biological organ shaped by the harsh pressures of the Pleistocene era. Our brains were designed for survival on the savannah where quick reactions to rustling grass were more valuable than a deep statistical analysis of probability. Today, we are walking around with ancient hardware, trying to navigate a high-tech, hyper-connected world. The result? We glitch, constant, predictable, and often expensive glitches. The man with a hammer. One of Munger's favorite analogies is the man with a hammer. To a man with a hammer, he famously said, "Every problem looks like a nail." This is the first great psychological trap. Professional over-influence. If you are a surgeon, you are biologically and economically incentivized to see surgery as a solution. If you are a lawyer, you see the world through the lens of litigation. This isn't just about greed. It's about how our brains filter reality. We don't see the world as it is. We see it through the narrow slit of our own expertise. Munger argues that to be rational, you must intentionally break your hammer. You must force yourself to see the problem from 5 or 6 different perspectives before you even allow yourself to form an opinion. If you can't state the opposing argument better than the person you're arguing with, you simply don't have the right to have an opinion. The rewards super-response tendency. Munger believed that the most powerful force in psychology and the one most often ignored's incentives. He called this the reward super-response tendency. Most people think they understand incentives, but they don't. They underestimate how much an incentive can bend a person's morality without them even realizing it. He often told the story of a salesman at a major plumbing supply company. The company had invented a new type of pipe that was objectively worse and more expensive than the old one. But the commission for selling the new pipe was 3 times higher. Within months, every salesman was convinced that the new pipe was a miracle of engineering. They weren't lying. They had subconsciously reshaped their reality to fit their paycheck. This is why Munger would look at a business and ask, who is being paid for what? If the incentives are broken, the people will eventually become broken too. You cannot expect a system to produce a moral or rational outcome if it rewards the opposite. Social proof, the lemmings of Wall Street. We are social animals. For our ancestors, being cast out of the tribe meant certain death. Therefore, we have a deep biological urge to do what others are doing. Munger calls this social proof. In a simple environment, this is a shortcut to safety. If everyone is running away from the bushes, you should probably run too. But in the world of investing or business, social proof is a poison. It creates bubbles. It makes people buy tech stocks in 1999 because everyone else is getting rich, and it makes them sell in panic during a crash because everyone else is scared. Munger's success was built on the rare ability to stand still while the crowd was stampeding. He understood that being right often requires you to be lonely. If you find yourself in agreement with the majority, that is the exact moment you should become the most skeptical of your own judgment. Consistency and commitment tendency. The human mind is a master of locking in. Once we make a public statement or take a small action toward a goal, we feel an overwhelming pressure to be consistent with that action. Munger calls this the consistency and commitment tendency. This is why cults start with small, harmless tasks. This is why lowballing works in sales. But in thinking, it's a death trap. We fall in love with our own ideas. We spend years building a career or a project, and even when the evidence shows it's failing, we throw good money after bad because our brains cannot handle the psychological pain of admitting we were wrong. Munger's solution was the Great Shredder. He made it a habit to seek out evidence that destroyed his most cherished beliefs. He took pride in killing his own ideas every year. The Lollapalooza of The true danger, Munger explains, isn't just one bias. It's when 3 or 4 of them act on you at the same time. He called this the Lollapalooza Effect. Think about a high-pressure auction. You have social proof other people are bidding. Consistency, tendency, you've already started bidding. Depreval superreaction, the fear of losing the item to someone else. And scarcity. When these forces combine, otherwise rational people pay 3 times what an object is worth. They aren't just making a mistake. They are caught in a psychological hurricane. Munger's method is to build a checklist of these biases. Before any major life decision, he would run down the list. Am I doing this because I want to be consistent? Am I being influenced by social proof? Is someone manipulating my incentives? By naming the demon, you take away its power. Real-world application. The architecture of choice. How do we use this? Munger suggests we stop trying to be brilliant and focus on being consistently not stupid. Wisdom is mostly about avoiding the standard pitfalls. If you're hiring someone, don't just listen to what they say. Look at their incentives. If you're starting a business, don't ask if it's a good idea. Ask if you're only doing it because you've already invested time into it. If you're feeling a rush of excitement about a limited time offer, realize that your primitive brain is being hijacked by the depreval super. The first step to thinking in systems is realizing that you are the most flawed part of the system. You are a biological machine with a tendency to overheat and veer off course. Only by acknowledging your own misjudgment tendencies can you begin to build a framework that accounts for them. As we move into the next chapter, keep this in mind. Your brain is a tool, but it's a tool with many factory defects. To build a life of wisdom, you have to learn how to work around those defects, rather than pretending they don't exist. Key takeaway. Intelligence is a high-powered engine, but psychology is the steering wheel. If the steering is broken, the speed only gets you to the crash faster. Now that we've identified the glitches in our internal software, how do we install a better operating system? We do it by building a latticework of mental models. Chapter 2. The Latticework of Mental Models. If the first step of the Munger Method is to acknowledge that our brains are flawed, the second step is to give those brains a better way to see. Most people go through life like a person trying to win a crossword puzzle with only 3 letters of the alphabet. They have a few tools, maybe some accounting, a bit of common sense, and their gut instinct, and they try to solve the hyper-complex puzzles of the 21st century with that limited kit. Charlie Munger's solution was radical in its simplicity and daunting in its scope. He called it the Latticework of Mental Models. Munger realized that reality doesn't respect the boundaries of university departments. The world isn't divided into the economics department, the psychology department, and the physics department. Everything is interconnected. If you only look at a business problem through the lens of economics, you are essentially a one-eyed man in a world of 3-dimensional depth. You will miss the biological forces of competition, the psychological forces of branding, and the mathematical forces of compounding. To Munger, worldly wisdom is the ability to weave the big ideas from every major discipline into a single, cohesive fabric of thought, the 80 or 90 big ideas. Munger argued that you don't need to be an expert in everything. You don't need a PhD in thermodynamics and a master's in social psychology. Instead, you need to master the big ideas from the big disciplines. He estimated there are about 80 or 90 models that carry about 90% of the freight in making you a worldly wise person. Think of these models as cognitive apps installed on your mental hardware. If you only have the accounting app installed, you can see if a company is making money today, but you can't see if it's about to be disrupted by a biological shift in consumer behavior. You need the evolutionary biology app to understand niche specialization. You need the physics app to understand equilibrium. You need the engineering app to understand backups and redundancy. The goal is to have these models so deeply embedded in your mind that they hang there in a latticework. When a new piece of information comes in a news story, a business proposal, a personal conflict, it doesn't just sit there in isolation. It hits the lattice, and you see how it connects to everything else. Compounding, the mathematics of patience. The first and most important model in Munger's lattice is compounding. In mathematics, compounding is a simple formula, but as a mental model, it is a way of life. Munger famously said, "The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily." Most people think of compounding only in terms of money, but Munger applied it to everything: knowledge, relationships, and reputation. If you get 1% better every day, you don't just end up 365% better at the end of the year. Because of the way the math works, you end up nearly 38 times better. Munger viewed himself as a continuous learning machine. He didn't try to have a eureka moment every week. He just tried to go to bed a little bit smarter than when he woke up. Over 70 years, that little bit compounded into a level of wisdom that seemed like magic to outsiders. He understood that the biggest rewards in life, the best friendships, the best investments, the best health come at the very end of a long, uninterrupted compounding curve. If you keep switching jobs, switching partners, or switching strategies, you are constantly resetting your compounding clock to zero. Ecosystems and niche specialization, the biology of business. Munger was a huge fan of Charles Darwin. He believed that the rules of the jungle applied perfectly to the world of capitalism. One of his favorite biological models was niche specialization. In nature, if an animal tries to do everything, it usually gets eaten. Survival comes to those who find a specific niche and become the absolute best in that narrow space. Munger applied this to business. He looked for wide-mode companies, businesses that had carved out a niche so specific and so defensible that no one else could compete. He also looked at ecosystems. A business isn't a machine. It's an organism in an environment. If the environment changes, say, the internet arrives, and the organism doesn't have the evolutionary flexibility to adapt, it will go extinct, regardless of how hard its employees work. This is the difference between a salary mindset, working hard within the cage, and a systems mindset, observing the ecosystem to see where the food is moving. Redundancy and margin of safety, the engineering of life. From the world of engineering, Munger took the concept of redundancy. When engineers build a bridge, they don't design it to hold exactly the weight of the cars expected to cross it. They design it to hold 5 times that weight. They build in backup systems. Munger applied this to his life and his finances. Most people live at capacity. They spend as much as they earn. They schedule every minute of their day, and they have no slack in their systems. When a black swan event happens, a job loss, a health crisis, a market crash, their bridge collapses because they had no redundancy. Munger's method involves always having a margin of safety. He kept massive amounts of dry powder cash so that he was never forced to sell his investments during a crash. He lived a life that was underscheduled, so he had the cognitive space to think. He knew that the world is inherently volatile, and the only way to survive a system you can't control is to build in more strength than you think you'll ever need. The tragedy of the commons, the economics of incentives. In economics, the tragedy of the commons describes a situation where individuals, acting in their own self-interest, deplete a shared resource, ultimately harming everyone. Munger used this to understand why large organizations often become corrupt or inefficient. If a system rewards a middle manager for increasing their department's budget rather than saving the company money, the manager will increase the budget. They are acting rationally within their local environment, even though they are hurting the global system of the company. Munger's latticework allowed him to see these incentive traps from a mile away. He avoided investing in companies with polluted commons and sought out those where the incentives were designed to protect the collective future of the firm. Synthesis: putting the lattice to work. How do you actually use this in real life? Imagine you are offered a new job. The accounting model tells you the salary is high. The compounding model asks, will my skills compound here, or is this a dead-end loop? The psychology model asks, are the people here high integrity, or will I be social-proofed into bad behavior? The biology model asks, does this company have a defensible niche in a changing ecosystem? The physics model asks, is this growth sustainable, or are there friction forces, competition, regulation that will slow it down? When you run a decision through the lattice, you aren't just guessing. You are calculating the structural integrity of the opportunity. You are looking at the same world as everyone else, but you are seeing the invisible wires that hold it together. Munger's life was a testament to the fact that you don't need to know everything about everything, but you must know the big truths from every field. If you don't, you are like a person trying to navigate the ocean with a map of a small city. You will eventually hit something you didn't see coming. Building this lattice is the work of a lifetime. It requires reading a lot of reading. Munger was often described by his children as a book with a couple of legs sticking out. But he wasn't reading for entertainment. He was reading for structure. He was looking for the universal laws that govern how things work. Key takeaway: real wisdom is not a collection of facts. It is a permanent, multidisciplinary framework that allows you to see the hidden architecture of any situation. Once you have your lattice work in place, you need a way to test it. You need a tool to ensure your thinking isn't just comprehensive, but also rigorous. That tool is the radical art of inversion. Chapter 3. The Power of Inversion. Most people approach life with a forward-thinking mindset. They ask, how can I be happy? How can I get rich? Or how can I make this business succeed? It seems like the natural, logical way to solve a problem. But Charlie Munger believed that many of the hardest problems in life are best solved backward. He took his cue from the 19th century German mathematician Carl Jacobi, whose motto was, man muss immer umkehren or, invert, always invert. Inversion is the practice of looking at what you want to achieve, and then looking at the opposite. Instead of asking how to succeed, you ask, what will guaranteedly make me fail? And then you spend your life meticulously avoiding those things. It sounds simple, almost too simple, to be profound. But in a world of complex systems, it is one of the most powerful tools for clarity ever discovered. The wisdom of avoiding stupidity. Munger famously said, it is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid, instead of trying to be very intelligent. This is the core philosophy of inversion. Think about a game of tennis. If you are a professional player, you win by hitting winners, powerful shots that your opponent can't reach. But if you are an amateur, statistics show that you don't win by hitting winners. You win by making fewer unforced errors. You win by keeping the ball in play and waiting for your opponent to hit it into the net. Life, for the most part, is an amateur's game. Most people lose their fortunes, their health, and their reputations, not because they weren't brilliant enough, but because they did something fundamentally stupid. They drove drunk. They gambled with money they couldn't afford to lose. They partnered with untrustworthy people, or they ignored a growing health problem. By inverting, you identify the unforced errors of life and cross them off your list. If you just avoid the 20 most common ways to ruin your life, you are almost guaranteed to end up in the top 5% of successful people by default. The anti-goal: how to be miserable. Let's apply this to something we all care about: happiness. If you ask 1,000 people how to be happy, you'll get 1,000 different, vague answers. Follow your passion, find love, get a promotion. These are hard to act on and even harder to measure. Now, let's invert it. Ask, how can I guarantee a life of absolute misery? Suddenly, the answers are crystal clear. Be unreliable. Make promises and break them. Be resentful. Carry a grudge against everyone who has more than you. Stay static. Never learn anything new and stay stuck in your current beliefs. Succumb to addiction. Let a substance or a habit control your daily routine. Be envious. Measure your worth only by comparing yourself to others. If you look at that list, you realize it's a perfect map of what not to do. Munger argued that it's much easier to avoid being a resentful, unreliable, unlearning addict than it is to find some elusive secret to happiness. By eliminating the misery makers, happiness tends to take care of itself. Inversion in business and investing. In the world of business, inversion is a shield against over-optimism. When a CEO is presented with a new project, they usually focus on the best-case scenario, the market share they'll gain, and the profits they'll make. Munger would do the opposite. He would ask, what could kill this company? What is the one thing that, if it happened, would make this whole investment worthless? By identifying the kill switch, you can build defenses. If the kill switch is a change in government regulation, you diversify. If the kill switch is a competitor lowering prices by 10%, you work on your brand loyalty or your cost structure. This also applies to the salary versus systems mindset. Most people ask, how can I get a raise? If you invert that, you ask, what makes an employee completely replaceable and low value, doing exactly what is asked and nothing more? Having a skill set that anyone can learn in 2 weeks, being difficult to work with, or having a bad attitude. Focusing on hours worked rather than results produced. By avoiding these traits, you naturally become the kind of person who doesn't have to ask for a raise. The system begins to reward you because you have become unreplaceable. The pre-mortem, predicting the disaster. A practical application of inversion is the pre-mortem. Most organizations do a post-mortem after a project fails to see what went wrong. Munger's method is to do it before the project even starts. Imagine you are about to launch a new YouTube channel or a software business. Before you record a single video or write a line of code, gather your team or sit down with a notebook and say, it is now 1 year from today. The business has utterly failed. It is a disaster. We are broke and embarrassed. Now tell me exactly how it happened. This isn't being a negative person. It's being a rational person. When you force yourself to visualize the failure, you see the cracks in your plan that your optimism bias was hiding. We failed because we didn't have a marketing budget. We failed because the audio quality was terrible. We failed because we didn't post consistently. Once you have the list of why we failed, you have your roadmap for success. You just make sure those specific things don't happen. Overcoming the confirmation bias through inversion. One of the most dangerous psychological glitches we discussed in Chapter 1 is confirmation bias, the tendency to only look for information that proves we are right. Inversion is the ultimate cure for this. Munger would say that if you have a theory, your job isn't to find evidence that it's true. Your job is to try to disprove it. In science, this is called falsification. If you think a stock is a great buy, don't look for bullish articles. Search for why stock name is going to zero. If you can't find a single argument that scares you or makes you doubt your position, you haven't looked hard enough. This is the intellectual honesty that Munger lived by. He didn't want to be right for the sake of his ego. He wanted to be right because his mental model matched reality. If reality said his idea was bad, he wanted to know as soon as possible so he could invert his position and move on. Psychological resilience. Finally, Inversion provides a deep sense of psychological calm. When you spend your time worrying about how to win, you are constantly in a state of anxiety because winning often involves factors outside your control. But when you focus on not losing, on being reliable, on learning every day, on avoiding debt, on being kind, you are focusing on things that are 100% within your control. Munger's life was long and filled with challenges, including the loss of a child and the loss of an eye. Yet he remained remarkably stoic. Why? Because he had inverted his expectations. He knew that life would involve hardship, and he focused his energy on not letting those hardships turn him into a bitter or defeated person. He couldn't control the bad luck, but he could control his reaction to it. Summary of the inversion process. To live the Munger Method, you must make inversion a daily habit. Define the problem. I want to build a successful YouTube channel. Invert it. What would make my channel a total failure? List the causes of failure. Boring topics, bad thumbnails, inconsistent uploads, being a Me Too creator. Build a system to avoid those causes. Research high-interest topics. Hire a professional thumbnail designer. Create a 3-month content calendar. Find a unique voice. Success, in Munger's eyes, isn't about reaching for the stars. It's about clearing the rocks from your path. If the path is clear, the journey takes care of itself. Key takeaway: you don't need to be a genius to succeed. You just need to be more rational than the average person by identifying and avoiding the guaranteed paths to failure. Now that we have the tools to see clearly mental models and think backward inversion, we need to understand the environment we are playing in. We need to look at the ecosystem of excellence and how to think in systems, not salaries. Chapter 4. The Ecosystem of Excellence Systems Thinking. Most people view their careers and businesses as a series of isolated events. You get a job, you perform a task, you receive a paycheck. This is what Charlie Munger calls the salary mindset. It is a linear way of looking at the world. Input A leads to output B, but the world is not a vending machine. It is a rainforest. It is a complex, adaptive system where every part affects every other part, and the whole is often far more or far less than the sum of its parts. To master the Munger Method, you must stop looking at parts and start looking at wholes. You must move from being a specialized cog in a machine to becoming an ecologist of your own life. The architecture of the ecosystem. In biology, an ecosystem is a community of living organisms interacting as a system. If you remove the wolves from Yellowstone Park, the elk overpopulate, the trees are overgrazed, the birds lose their nesting sites, and the very flow of the rivers changes. Munger applied this exact logic to business and personal wealth. A successful company like Costco or Berkshire Hathaway isn't just good at selling things. It is an ecosystem of excellence. Every part of the business reinforces every other part. Take Costco as a prime example. Most retailers try to maximize their margins. They buy a product for $10 and try to sell it for $15. Costco does the opposite. They use their massive scale to buy the product for $9, and then they sell it for $10.50, intentionally keeping their margins thin. To a salary mindset thinker, this looks like leaving money on the table. But to a systems thinker like Munger, this is a feedback loop. The low prices create fanatical customer loyalty. That loyalty creates massive volume. That volume gives Costco more power to negotiate even lower prices with suppliers, which they then pass back to the customer. This is a virtuous cycle. It is a system that gets stronger as it grows. Munger didn't want to invest in good businesses. He wanted to invest in self-reinforcing systems. He looked for companies that had built a moat, a structural advantage, that made it nearly impossible for a competitor to enter the ecosystem without being destroyed. Feedback loops. The nervous system of reality at the heart of every system is the feedback loop. There are two kinds, reinforcing positive and balancing negative. Reinforcing loops are the engines of growth and decay. In business, this is the network effect. The more people use a platform like YouTube, the more creators want to be there. The more creators there are, the more viewers come. This is how you get exponential growth. Balancing loops are the forces of stability and stagnation. When you get a raise, you might increase your spending, which keeps your net wealth at exactly the same level as before. This is a balancing loop that keeps you trapped in the salary mindset. Munger's secret was his ability to identify which loop he was in. He realized that most people are stuck in balancing loops, where their effort is neutralized by their habits. To break out, you have to find a reinforcing loop. This is why he focused so heavily on reading. Knowledge compounds. If you learn a big idea today, it makes the idea you learn tomorrow 10% more useful. That is a reinforcing loop that eventually leads to a Lollapalooza of wisdom. The era of linear thinking. The biggest mistake people make in a system is assuming that the relationship between cause and effect is linear. We think that if we work 20% harder, we will get 20% better results. But in complex systems, results are often non-linear. Munger often spoke about the critical mass, or the boiling point. You can heat water from 30 degrees to 211 degrees, and it just looks like hot water. It's only at 212 degrees that it turns into steam and can power a locomotive. Many people give up at 210 degrees because they don't see the results. They are looking for a salary, a steady increase, when they should be looking for a phase shift, a system-wide transformation. This is why Munger was so patient. He knew that a system needs time to build latent potential. If you are building a YouTube channel or a new business, you might see 0 results for 6 months. A linear thinker calls this a failure and quits. A systems thinker realizes they are heating the water and keeps going until they hit the boiling point. The law of unintended consequences. Because everything in a system is connected, you can never do just one thing. Every action has a second-order and third-order effect. Munger was obsessed with second-order thinking. When a government raises taxes on the wealthy, the first-order effect is more revenue. But the second-order effect might be that the wealthy move their capital to another country. The third-order effect is a decline in local jobs and a net decrease in total tax revenue. In your personal life, a salary mindset decision might be to take a high-paying job that requires a 2-hour commute. First-order effect, more money in the bank. Second-order effect, less time for exercise and sleep. Third-order effect, declining health, increased stress, and a breakdown in family relationships. Munger's method requires you to ask, and then what? You must look 3 steps ahead. If the third-order effect of a decision is ruinous, the first-order benefit is a trap. Building your personal ecosystem. How do you apply systems thinking to your own life? You stop looking for tasks and start building assets. A salary is a task. You do it, you get paid, and the transaction is over. You have to start again from 0 tomorrow. A system is an asset. It is something that works for you while you sleep. Financial systems, investing in compounding assets, stocks, real estate, businesses. Knowledge systems, building a commonplace book or a digital garden where your ideas can cross-pollinate. Social systems, building a network of high-integrity people who help you without you having to ask. Munger and Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway as a system of systems. They didn't manage the companies they bought. Instead, they created a system of extreme decentralization. They hired great people, gave them total autonomy, and aligned their incentives. The system was designed to be so. You can do the same. If you are a content creator, don't just make videos. Build a system for researching, a system for editing, and a system for distribution. When the system is healthy, the success happens automatically as a byproduct of the system's function. The checklist as a system tool. Munger was a huge advocate for checklists. Even the most brilliant pilot in the world uses a checklist before takeoff. Why? Because the human brain is a noisy part of the system. We get tired, we get distracted, we get emotional. A checklist is a systematic intervention to prevent human error. Munger had a mental checklist for every investment. Is it within my circle of competence? Does it have a sustainable competitive advantage? Is the management high integrity? Is the price right? If any of these boxes weren't checked, he didn't invest. It didn't matter how excited he felt. The system, the checklist, overrode the emotion. Conclusion of the systems chapter. To think in systems is to realize that you are not a victim of circumstances, but a designer of environments. Most of the bad luck people experience is actually the result of a poorly designed personal system. And most of the good luck Munger experienced was the inevitable result of a system designed to catch opportunities and minimize risks. As Munger would say, the world is not yet crazy enough to reward people who don't have a system. If you want the results of the top 1%, you must stop acting like a part and start building like a whole. Key takeaway: success is not a single event. It is the inevitable output of a well-designed, self-reinforcing system that accounts for second-order effects and nonlinear growth. But what happens when the forces within a system don't just add up, but multiply? That is when we enter the territory of the most powerful phenomenon in the Munger universe, the Lollapalooza Effect. Chapter 5: The Lollapalooza Effect. If you've ever seen a massive forest fire, you know that it's rarely caused by one thing. It's not just the lightning strike. It's the 3-year drought that dried the timber, the high-speed winds that fanned the flames, and the specific topography of the canyon that created a chimney effect. Individually, each factor is manageable. Together, they create an unstoppable inferno. Charlie Munger called this phenomenon the Lollapalooza Effect. In most of our academic training, we are taught to isolate variables. We look at psychology in one room and economics in another. But Munger realized that in the real world, these forces don't stay in their rooms. They break down the doors, meet in the hallway, and combine to create results that are not just large, but explosive. A Lollapalooza is what happens when 3, 4, or 5 different mental models or forces all push in the same direction at the same time. The science of synergy. The term synergy is often dismissed as corporate buzzword, but Munger reclaimed it as a fundamental law of reality. He observed that when you reach a certain threshold of combined forces, you get a phase transition. Take the example of a commercial airplane. An airplane is a Lollapalooza of engineering. It's not just the engines. It's the Bernoulli principle on the wings, the lightweight carbon fiber materials, the hydraulic systems, and the GPS navigation. If you have 90% of these parts working, the plane doesn't fly. 90% as well, it doesn't fly at all. You need the confluence of all these forces to achieve lift. Munger applied this to human behavior. He realized that most massive successes and most catastrophic failures are Lollapalooza events. They are the result of multiple psychological biases and market forces locking together to create a superforce. The dark side. The Tupperware party and the cult. Munger often used the Tupperware party or the open outcry auction as a classic example of a dark Lollapalooza. Why do people walk into an auction and pay 50% more than an item is worth? It's because the environment is designed to trigger a Lollapalooza of biases. Social proof. You see other people bidding, so the item must be valuable. Commitment. Consistency. Once you raise your hand for the first bid, you feel an internal pressure to follow through. Deprived superreaction. The fear of losing the item to the person standing next to you creates a panic response. Authority. The fast-talking auctioneer acts as a dominant authority figure, urging you to act. When these 4 forces hit a human brain simultaneously, the rational executive function of the brain shuts down. You are no longer a modern human. You are a biological machine responding to a Lollapalooza. Munger's method teaches us to recognize these moments. When you feel a rush of excitement in a sales environment, you should visualize a giant red Lollapalooza sign flashing in your mind and walk out of the room. The bright side. The moat of Costco. On the positive side, a Lollapalooza can create a business that is essentially unbull. We discussed Costco's system in the previous chapter, but its true power is a Lollapalooza of reinforcing loops. Costco combines scale advantage, buying in massive bulk, operational excellence, bare-bones warehouses with no decor, psychological loyalty. The membership model makes customers feel like they are part of an exclusive club, social proof, and commitment. High employee wages, which leads to lower turnover and better service incentive, because all these forces are pushing toward one goal: extreme value for the customer. It creates a Lollapalooza effect that a competitor cannot beat by just changing one thing. A competitor can't just lower their prices because they don't have the scale. They can't just pay more because they don't have the lean operations. The confluence of forces creates a moat that is miles wide. The Lollapalooza of knowledge. This also applies to your personal growth. If you only read books on business, you might get a small advantage. But if you combine A deep understanding of microeconomics to understand competition. A deep understanding of psychology to understand why people buy. A deep understanding of storytelling to communicate your ideas. The habit of daily discipline to execute. Suddenly, you aren't just a business person. You are a Lollapalooza of talent. You become a force multiplier. This is why Munger was so adamant about the latticework of mental models. The lattice is the structure that allows these forces to connect. Without the lattice, your knowledge is just a pile of bricks. With it, it's a cathedral. Detecting the heavy freight. Munger's method for identifying a Lollapalooza opportunity is to look for extreme outcomes. If you see a company that is growing 100% year over year, or a person who has achieved 10 times more than their peers, don't look for a single cause. Look for the confluence. Ask, what are the 3 or 4 forces acting here that are all pushing in the same direction? In the world of YouTube automation or digital products, a Lollapalooza might look like a massive market trend, AI advancement, a unique creative angle, code and obscure art style, high-frequency output systems, consistency, viral hooks, psychology of curiosity. If you only have one of these, you might make a salary. If you align all 4, you create a Lollapalooza that can change your life in months rather than decades. The danger of the one-factor explanation. The most common mistake people make is trying to simplify a Lollapalooza down to one thing. We see a successful person and say, they just got lucky, or they are just hardworking. Munger warns that this one-factor thinking is a form of intellectual laziness. Hard work is almost never enough on its own. Luck is rarely enough on its own. It is the interaction between hard work, a great system, a deep understanding of psychology, and a favorable market environment that creates the magic. If you want to move from salaries to systems, you must stop looking for the secret ingredient and start looking for the chemistry of the reaction. Real-world story, the Coca-Cola analysis. One of Munger's most famous intellectual exercises was his 5-minute analysis of Coca-Cola. He asked, how would you create a $2 trillion company from scratch? He didn't start with make a tasty drink. He started with a Lollapalooza of forces. Conditioned reflex, using sugar and caffeine to create a physical reward. Biology, psychology, social proof. Massive advertising to make the red can a universal symbol of happiness. Availability, ensuring the product is within an arm's reach of desire everywhere on Earth. Logistics, systems, scale, lowering the cost of production until no one can compete on price. When you drink a Coke, you aren't just tasting soda. You are experiencing the end result of a century-long, multidisciplinary Lollapalooza. Munger's ability to see these forces is what made him a master-level thinker. Living the Lollapalooza. To apply this, you must become an architect of your own environment. You must ask, how can I arrange my life so that my incentives, my habits, my social circle, and my knowledge are all pushing me toward the same goal? Most people have clashing forces. They want to be healthy goal, but their friends eat junk food social proof. Their kitchen is full of sugar environment, and they are stressed from work psychology. They are trying to fight a Lollapalooza with willpower. Willpower always loses. The Munger Method is to align the forces. Surround yourself with people who value learning. Design your physical space to make good habits easy and bad habits hard. Automate your savings and investments so you don't have to make decisions. Continuously upgrade your mental models so you see opportunities others miss. When you align your internal and external worlds, you don't have to push anymore. The Lollapalooza Effect creates a current that carries you toward success. Key takeaway: extraordinary results, whether good or bad, are never the result of a single cause. They are the result of multiple factors acting in concert to create a non-linear explosion of outcome. But there is a catch. To capture a Lollapalooza, you cannot be a frantic actor. You cannot be chasing every new trend. You must master the most difficult skill of all: the art of sitting on your hands. Chapter 6. The art of sitting on your hands. In a world that celebrates the hustle, where we are told that the person who wakes up earliest and works the longest wins, Charlie Munger's most profound advice feels almost like an insult. He famously said, "It is waiting that helps you as an investor." And a lot of people just can't stand to wait. He didn't just apply this to stocks. He applied it to everything. He believed that the greatest successes in life come not from constant activity, but from intense preparation, followed by aggressive action. Most people are trapped in a state of frenetic mediocrity. They are always doing something. They check their emails every 5 minutes. They trade stocks every week, and they jump from one business idea to the next. This constant movement creates the illusion of progress. But in reality, it is just churn. It is the enemy of compounding. Munger's method is the opposite. It is the philosophy of the sniper, not the machine gunner. The 20-slot punch card. One of the most famous concepts Munger and Buffett shared is the 20-slot punch card rule. Imagine that when you start your career, you are given a card with only 20 slots in it. Every time you make a major life decision, a career change, a big investment, a marriage, a business launch, you have to punch one of those slots. Once the 20 slots are gone, you can never make another major move again. If you truly lived by this rule, how would your behavior change? You wouldn't jump into a business because a friend mentioned it over coffee. You wouldn't buy a stock because it went up 10% yesterday. You would wait. You would study the mental models we discussed. You would invert the problem to see the risks. You would wait until the odds were so heavily in your favor that it would be stupid not to act. This is the system's approach to patience. A salary is a reward for showing up every day. A system is a reward for waiting for the right moment. Munger understood that extraordinary opportunities are rare by definition. If they happened every day, they wouldn't be extraordinary. Therefore, the logical thing to do is spend most of your time doing nothing but reading, thinking, and preparing. The bias toward action. Why is sitting on your hands so hard? Because of a psychological glitch. Munger identified the action bias. As humans, we feel better when we are doing something, especially during times of stress. If we see the market crashing, our instinct is to sell. If we see a competitor launching a new product, our instinct is to rush out a copycat version. Munger called this the itch. We feel a physical need to scratch it. But in a complex system, the most productive thing you can do is often to stay still. Munger's partner, Warren Buffett, often compared investing to a baseball game where there are no called strikes. You can stand at the plate and watch 50 pitches go by. The crowd might boo, the pitcher might laugh, but as long as you don't swing, you aren't out. You can wait for the fat pitch, the one right in your circle of competence. And only then do you swing with everything you have. The circle of competence. To sit on your hands effectively, you must know where your hands belong. This is the circle of competence. Munger was brutal about this. He divided the world into 3 buckets: yes, no, and too hard. Most of the things that come across your desk, new technologies, complex geopolitical shifts, crypto trends, belong in the too hard bucket. Munger didn't feel bad about not understanding them. He didn't feel a fear of missing out, FOMO. He knew that he only needed to be right about a few things within his circle to build a legendary life. If you are a master of YouTube automation and book summaries, that is your circle. If someone tells you there is a surefire way to make money in real estate flipping, that is outside your circle. Instead of rushing to learn a whole new discipline from scratch, Munger would tell you to sit on your hands. Wait for an opportunity within your existing circle of expertise. When you stay within your circle, your mental models work better, your inversion is more accurate, and your Lollapalooza effects are easier to spot. The Asanya chair requirement. Sitting on your hands isn't just about waiting, it's about continuous learning. Munger's children famously joked that their father was a book with a couple of legs sticking out. He believed that the only way to recognize the fat pitch when it finally arrives is to be a learning machine. If you aren't reading, you aren't waiting, you're just idling. There is a massive difference. Waiting, in the Munger sense, is active. You are scanning the horizon. You are refining your models. You are studying history. You are building the latent potential we talked about in Chapter 4. When the opportunity finally comes, perhaps a market crash that makes high-quality companies cheap, or a technological shift that perfectly aligns with your skills, you won't be hesitant. You will be the only person in the room who is prepared to act with aggressive decisiveness. aggressive decisiveness. The flip side of sitting on your hands is that when you do move, you must move with overwhelming force. Munger despised timidity. He believed that when the world offers you a rare opportunity, where the odds are 90% in your favor, you shouldn't just dip your toe in. You should bet the ranch. This is the full audiobook philosophy of the Munger Method. Most people diversify because they are afraid. They put a little bit of money here, a little bit there, and they end up with average results. Munger argued that if you have worked hard to build a latticework of mental models, and you have inverted the risks, and you have waited 3 years for the right moment, you should put a massive amount of your dry powder into that one opportunity, whether it's a business deal, a career move, or a creative project. The Munger Method is extreme patience, then extreme aggression. Real-world application. The content creator's dilemma. Think about a content creator on YouTube. The salary mindset says, I must post 3 videos a week, no matter what, to keep the algorithm happy. This leads to burnout and a decline in quality. You are swinging at every pitch, even the bad ones. The Munger Method for a creator would be: sit on your hands, spend weeks researching, thinking, and finding the Lollapalooza of ideas. Wait for the fat pitch. Wait until you have a topic, a thumbnail, and a script that you know is world-class. Aggressive action. Spend 10 times more effort on that one video than anyone else. Make it so good it becomes an evergreen asset that compounds for years. One hit video that gains 5 million views is worth more than 100 mediocre videos that gain 10,000 views each. The hit is the result of sitting on your hands until you have a winner. The stoicism of non-action. There is a deep philosophical layer to this. Sitting on your hands requires a high level of self-control and stoicism. You have to watch your friends make quick money in a bubble and feel nothing. You have to watch the world rush past you and be comfortable with your own slow pace. Munger often quoted the poet Kipling, if you can keep your head when all about you / are losing theirs and blaming it on you. This is the essence of the method. It is the ability to trust your system more than you trust your emotions. It is the realization that the world is designed to tempt you into making unforced errors, and your primary job is to simply not participate in the madness. Summary of the waiting game. To implement this chapter, you must change your relationship with time. Stop valuing busyness. High activity is often a sign of a low-quality system. Build dry powder. Always have extra cash, extra time, and extra energy in reserve for when the fat pitch arrives. Shrink your yes bucket. Most things are too hard or not worth it. Be okay with saying no to 99% of opportunities. Read to prepare. Use the waiting time to upgrade your mental hardware. As Munger said, the big money is not in the buying and the selling, but in the waiting. This applies to wealth, but also to wisdom and reputation. The best version of your life is waiting for you to stop chasing the salary of the moment and start waiting for the systemic win of a lifetime. Key takeaway: success is 90% preparation and 10% execution. The art of sitting on your hands ensures that when you finally swing, you hit a home run. But how do we know who to trust during the wait? How do we understand the human element of the system? To do that, we must look at the most powerful, invisible force in the world: incentives. Chapter 7. Incentives, the hidden superpower. If there is one law of the universe that Charlie Munger believed was almost as reliable as gravity, it is the power of incentives. He famously remarked, I think I've been in the top 5% of my age cohort all my life in understanding the power of incentives. And all my life I've underestimated it. To most people, an incentive is just a bonus or a commission. But in the Munger Method, incentives are the invisible wiring of human civilization. If you want to understand why a system is failing, or why a person is behaving in a way that seems irrational, you don't look at their personality, you look at their incentives. The iron rule of behavior. Munger's core thesis was simple: show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome. Most of the world's problems are incentive-caused. People aren't necessarily bad or evil. They are simply responding to the rewards provided by their environment. If you pay a lawyer by the hour, they will find ways to make the work take longer. If you pay a surgeon for every operation they perform, they will find reasons to operate. If you pay a salesman for volume rather than profit, they will give the product away for free just to hit their numbers. This is the reward supersponse tendency. It is a psychological force so strong that it can bypass a person's conscious moral compass. The person doesn't even know they are being biased. They believe they are doing the right thing, while their subconscious mind is busy aligning their truth with their paycheck. The FedEx story, a masterclass in systems design. Munger loves to tell the story of Federal Express, FedEx. In their early days, FedEx had a massive problem with their night shift sorting. They needed to move packages from one plane to another in a very short window of time. But no matter how many rah-rah motivational speeches the managers gave, the shift was always late. They tried everything. They threatened the workers. They offered training. Nothing worked. Finally, someone realized the incentive was broken. They were paying the workers by the hour because they were paid for their time. The workers were subconsciously incentivized to work slowly so they could get more hours. FedEx changed the system. They stopped paying by the hour and started paying by the shift. They told the workers, as soon as all the planes are loaded, you can go home. The result, the system fixed itself overnight. The packages were sorted faster than ever before. There were no more motivational speeches needed because the systemic incentive was now perfectly aligned with the company goal. Misaligned incentives, the root of all evil. Munger argued that one of the greatest duties of a leader or an individual is to avoid creating incentive-cause bias. When incentives are misaligned, they create a Lollapalooza of bad behavior. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. Mortgage brokers were paid to close loans, regardless of whether the borrower could pay them back. Bankers were paid bonuses based on short-term profits, while the long-term risks were pushed onto the taxpayers. The system wasn't broken. It was performing exactly as it was designed to. It was rewarding recklessness, so it produced a catastrophe. In your own life, you must audit your incentives. Are you rewarding yourself for hours worked or for outcomes achieved? If you are a freelancer or a content creator, and you pay yourself based on the number of videos you produce, you might be incentivizing yourself to create low-quality filler content. You must invert the incentive, pay yourself, or reward your focus for the impact or the retention of your work. The power of skin in the game. Munger was a staunch believer in the concept of skin in the game, a term later popularized by Nassim Taleb. He believed that no one should be allowed to make decisions for others unless they also shared in the consequences of those decisions. This is why he and Warren Buffett kept almost all of their net worth in Berkshire Hathaway stock. They didn't take massive salaries or stock options. If the shareholders lost money, Munger and Buffett lost money. This alignment of interest is the ultimate insurance policy. It ensures that the person at the helm is navigating with the same level of care as if it were their own life on the line. When you are looking for partners, employees, or even advice, always ask, does this person have skin in the game? If a financial advisor gets a commission, regardless of whether you make money, their incentive is to sell you products, not to grow your wealth. If a doctor recommends a procedure, ask if there are alternative incentives at play. Grannies and the Anton-Olaf strategy. Munger often spoke about the granny's rule of incentives. You have to eat your carrots before you get your dessert. On a personal level, this is how you manage your own psychology. You use high-value rewards to bribe yourself into doing the difficult, high-leverage work. But on a larger scale, it's about understanding that humans are like ants on a leaf. We are often carried by forces we don't fully perceive. If you want to change someone's mind, don't appeal to their reason. Appeal to their interest. As Benjamin Franklin, one of Munger's heroes, said, if you would persuade, appeal to interest and not to reason. If you can show someone how a certain path will benefit them, their brain will find its own rational reasons to agree with you. The incentive of reputation. Not all incentives are financial. One of the most powerful models in the Munger Method is the incentive of reputation. Munger understood that in a long-term system, a deservedly trusted reputation is the most valuable asset you can own. It creates a frictionless environment. If people trust you, they don't need 100-page contracts. They don't need to audit your every move. This seamless web of deserved trust is a Lollapalooza of efficiency. Therefore, the ultimate Munger-style incentive is to act in a way that builds trust over decades. You might lose a small amount of money today by being honest about a mistake, but you are investing in the long-term incentive of your reputation. This is systems thinking applied to morality. Being good isn't just a spiritual choice. It is a rational, high ROI strategy, designing your own success system. To move from salaries to systems, you must become an incentive architect. Identify the goal. What is the actual outcome you want? For example, a high-quality YouTube channel that builds authority. Audit the current incentives. What are you currently rewarding? For example, am I rewarding myself for just uploading or for audience satisfaction? Align the rewards. Create a system where the easier or more rewarding path is the one that leads to the goal. For example, reward yourself with free time only after the deep work of scriptwriting is completed. Check for perverse incentives. Ask, what is the worst thing that could happen if this incentive works too well? For example, if I reward myself for views, will I start making clickbait that ruins my reputation? Conclusion of the incentives chapter. Munger's obsession with incentives wasn't cynical. It was practical. He believed that by understanding what drives people, you could build better businesses, better families, and a better life. He didn't waste time complaining about human nature. He simply accepted human nature as a fixed constant and focused his energy on designing systems that worked with it rather than against it. As we move toward the final pillar of the Munger Method, remember this: the world is a giant web of rewards and punishments. If you don't understand the incentives, you are just a pawn in someone else's game. If you do understand them, you can start to move the pieces yourself. Key takeaway: you can never change human nature, but you can change the outcomes by changing the incentives. A system that rewards the wrong behavior will always fail, no matter how good the people in it are. We've covered the psychology, the models, the systems, and the incentives. But there is one final piece that holds it all together: the character of the person behind the method. Let's look at the ethos of a life well lived. Chapter 8. The ethos of a life well lived. After all the talk of mental models, compound interest, and the Lollapalooza effect, one might assume that Charlie Munger was simply a cold, calculating machine, a human supercomputer designed to extract profit from the market. But that would be a profound misunderstanding of the man. To Munger, the method was never just about the money. The money was merely the scoreboard for a much more important game: the pursuit of a rational, honorable, and useful life. The final pillar of the Munger Method is ethos. It is the character-driven why that justifies the intellectual how. Munger believed that if you became the smartest person in the room but lacked reliability, curiosity, and integrity, you had fundamentally failed. A systems mindset isn't just for your bank account, it's for your soul. The continuous learning machine. If there was a single commandment in the Munger household, it was this: thou shalt not stop learning. Munger viewed the mind as a muscle that either grows or atrophies. He famously noted that he didn't know a single wise person who didn't read all the time. But he wasn't just reading for data. He was reading for disruption. He believed that the greatest danger to a successful person is their own past success. We become frozen in our ways of thinking. Munger's ethos required a radical humility, the willingness to destroy your own best ideas the moment a better one came along. He called himself a learning machine. In the salary mindset, you learn a skill, get a job, and then coast on that knowledge for 40 years. In the Munger Method, your graduation ceremony is just a starting gun. You must be better this year than you were last year. If you aren't, you are essentially dying. This isn't a burden, it's a privilege. It's the realization that curiosity is the only thing that keeps the mind young. The deservedly trusted life. In a world that often rewards fake it till you make it and growth at all costs, Munger stood for something old-fashioned: reliability. He believed that being deservedly trusted was the highest form of social capital. Most people treat ethics as a set of rules they have to follow to avoid getting in trouble. Munger saw ethics as a power law. When you are 100% reliable, people want to work with you. Opportunities find you. You don't have to waste energy looking over your shoulder or maintaining a complex web of lies. you create a frictionless life. He often spoke of the seamless web of deserved trust. When you build a system, whether it's a family or a multi-billion-dollar corporation, where everyone can trust everyone else, the efficiency is staggering. You don't need lawyers, you don't need audits, you don't need oversight, you just move. To live a Munger-like life is to realize that polishing your character is the most practical business decision you will ever make. The sin of envy. If there was one human emotion Munger had zero tolerance for, it was envy. He called it the only fun-free sin. Gluttony has the pleasure of the food. Lust has the pleasure of the flesh. But envy is just pure, unadulterated misery. Munger saw envy as a systemic error in human psychology. It's a glitch that makes you unhappy because someone else is doing better. He realized that the salary mindset is fueled by envy, comparing your paycheck to your neighbor's, your car to your friends. To overcome this, Munger practiced internal validation. He didn't care if the world thought he was out of touch or boring. He cared if his actions matched his models. If you can eliminate envy from your system, you gain an enormous competitive advantage. You become rational while everyone else is being driven mad by keeping up with the Joneses. You make decisions based on your own circle of competence, not on someone else's highlight reel. Objectivity, the duty to be rational. For Munger, being rational wasn't just a suggestion, it was a moral duty. He believed that if you have the capacity to think clearly and you choose to let your emotions or biases take over, you are being irresponsible. This is where the ethos meets the psychology. To be rational, you must be a truth seeker, even when the truth hurts. Munger would often say, "I have a leaden eye for my own flaws." Most people have a golden eye for their own flaws. They see them as quirks or circumstances. Munger's ethos required the courage to look at your own mistakes with the cold objectivity of a scientist. This objectivity is what allowed him to sit on his hands chapter 6 when everyone else was panicking. He wasn't braver than others. He was just more committed to the truth of the system than the feeling of the moment. The avoidance of resentment. Closely tied to envy is resentment. Munger believed that feeling like a victim is a guaranteed path to misery, even if you have been genuinely wronged. He argued that dwelling on it is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. His life wasn't perfect. He faced the death of his young son, a divorce, and the loss of an eye due to a medical mistake. Yet, he refused to let these events define him. He viewed them as data points in a complex system. He moved forward. This anti-victim mindset is essential for systems thinking. If you believe the system is out to get you, you stop looking for the levers you can pull to change your outcome. Munger's ethos is one of extreme personal responsibility, generosity, and stewardship. Finally, Munger believed in the concept of stewardship. Once you have built your ecosystem of excellence and your Lollapalooza has generated wealth, what do you do with it? Munger wasn't a fan of flashy displays of wealth. He viewed himself as a steward of capital and ideas. He gave away hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly, he gave away his knowledge. He spent his final decades giving long, rambling, brilliant speeches to anyone who would listen, sharing the method for free. He believed that the best use of a human life is to be a useful person, not a famous person, not a powerful person, but a useful one. If you can help the system around you function more rationally and effectively, you have lived well. Summary of the Munger ethos. To live the Munger method is to adopt a code of conduct that transcends business. Be a learning machine. Go to bed smarter than you woke up. Be deservedly trusted. Build a reputation that requires no contracts. Kill your envy. Measure yourself by an internal scorecard. Accept your duty of rationality. Don't let your emotions hijack your brain. Refuse the victim mindset. Take total responsibility for your system. This is the bedrock. Without this ethos, the mental models are just parlor tricks. With it, they are the foundation of a life that compounds not just in dollars, but in dignity. Key takeaway: real success is not what you have, but who you become. By aligning your character with the laws of reality, you create a life that is both successful and worth living. We have journeyed through the mind of a master. We have seen the glitches, the models, the inversion, the systems, and the character. Now, It is time to bring it all together and see what this looks like in your daily life. Conclusion: the architecture of wisdom. We have spent this journey deconstructing the mind of Charlie Munger, but the true goal was never just to understand him, it was to rebuild you. We've moved from the salary mindset, where life is a linear series of trades, to a systems mindset, where life is an interconnected web of compounding forces. The deeper message of the Munger Method is that rationality is a superpower. In a world increasingly driven by short-term outrage, algorithmic dopamine, and specialized narrowness, the person who can step back and see the latticework has an almost unfair advantage. Munger didn't succeed because he was a wizard. He succeeded because he was a sanity seeker in an asylum. He realized that most of our problems are actually just the inevitable outputs of poorly designed systems, and that by changing the models in our heads, we change the world around us. This philosophy has a profound psychological impact. It replaces anxiety with agency. When you stop worrying about the weather, the things you cannot control, and start focusing on your vessel, your mental models, your integrity, and your preparation, you find a sense of calm that no market crash or career setback can take away. The 5 pillars of the Munger life. To bring this into your daily reality, start with these 5 principles. Collect mental models, not just facts. Every time you encounter a problem, ask which big idea from biology, physics, or psychology explains it. Invert every major decision before you ask how to win. List every way you could lose, and then build a wall against those failures. Audit your incentives monthly. Look at your habits and your work. Ask, what am I actually being rewarded for right now? If the reward is wrong, the behavior will be too. Practice the 20-slot punch card. Treat your attention and your capital as finite resources. Stop swinging at mediocre opportunities and wait for the fat pitches. Be a continuous learning machine. Dedicate time every single day to reading things that challenge your current beliefs. If you don't kill one of your own bad ideas every year, you aren't growing. As we close this chapter, I want to leave you with one final thought. Charlie Munger lived to be 99 years old, and until his final breath, he remained curious, sharp, and useful. He proved that wisdom is not a destination you reach. It is a way of walking. The fog in the forest never truly goes away. But if you have built your lighthouse, you never have to fear the dark. So, as you step back into your life, ask yourself this: is your current system designed for the person you want to become? Or are you just working hard inside a broken machine? The tools are now in your hands. It's time to start building.